then don't feed yourself what's indigestible. And certainly don't warp the world around you with deceit you know to be deceitful. It's extraordinarily damaging and dangerous.
Where do you find the hope and the strength to continue to fight? Or for those who are listening, to get the motivation to stand up and say what's on their mind?
People have to have a dialogue with their own conscience. Imagine that you get upset with something when you recognize an obstacle in your path, and then imagine that you need a path and that you've chosen reasonably wisely, let's say, not perfectly, but reasonably wisely. An obstacle arises, you're frustrated, disappointed, ashamed, afraid. Well, you have something to do to clear out the obstacle. You have something to say. Well, then you don't clear out the obstacle because you're afraid to speak or you're unwilling to speak. You want to defer the conflict because you hope it will go away. All that'll happen is that the obstacles will pile up. But then your life will be nothing but obstacles. Well, you need to know that. You have to ask yourself if you believe that's true. If it's true, then you don't want to remain silent. Imagine too that as you remain silent, you get smaller because you're not manifesting the courage necessary to live by your own standards. And the problem gets bigger. Well, if you're not going to speak now, what makes you think you're going to be more prepared in the future? Why is that going to happen? When does that ever happen? Generally what happens is people cave very rapidly and they apologize like mad, even if they haven't done anything wrong. And I think that's a mistake. I understand why people do it. I mean, I really do understand why people do it, but it isn't, I don't think it's a good idea. If you haven't done anything, so that's the thing about the presumption of innocence. And it really is a miracle, right? Because if you think that, if I accuse you, my tendency is to think that you're bad. And you might think, well, my tendency is to think that I'm good. But, that isn't the tendency for most people. People have a pretty guilty conscience, almost everyone. And it does tie itself up with this idea of monstrosity that you just described. The only person for whom public opinion means nothing is a psychopath, right? The rest of us regulate ourselves by watching our impact on others. And we're doing that all the time. And generally, even if the fault is relatively trivial, I mean, we're capable of denial and all of that, but generally, we take our impact on other people very seriously. And so the presumption of innocence is a very difficult thing even to apply to yourself, but it's unbelievably useful. It's like, wait a sec, you're innocent unless you're proven guilty.